Approval of International Teacher Services Agreement.
Yes, sir. Once again, thank you, Dr. Johnson, members of the board, Dr. Green. Due to teacher shortages in critical needs areas of math, science, and special education, the services of Interlodge Incorporated will provide the district with additional staffing resources for filling vacant critical needs areas. I would like to ask Ms. Carla Smith as well as Mr. Michael Walker to provide the Board of Education with a synopsis relative to the selection of this particular company. Ms. Smith?
Good afternoon. The RFP 16476 International Teacher Service Provider RFP went out on the May 21st, 2015. It's the first advertisement. It was advertised again on May 28th in 2015. We did have a little difficulty in trying to find samples as far as to relative to this particular RFP. We had to search really hard to try to find one. We did find one in a county in Savannah. So once we put it out, we did have a total of 50 vendors that we were notified through an email blast. It was posted in the Champion, which is our origin that we normally post all of our solicitations. And we had another venue we went through was through the Georgia Procurement Registry, which had 1,300 vendors there, and we only got 2 responses. After the responses were actually reviewed for responsible and responsiveness, it was gone to the evaluation committee, and that's where they made the evaluation.
Okay, Mr. Walker?
Thank you. Good afternoon. During the evaluation process of the RFPs, the 2 responsive offerers really provided insufficient information, and that process yielded insufficient information for the district to be able to make a determination. In particular, the responses really did not provide adequate guarantees that the district's concerns regarding certain employment practices were going to be adequately addressed moving forward. The decision was made to cancel that RFP and then move forward pursuant to policy DJE, the procurement policy for the procurement of professional services that contemplates the selection of professional services outside the competitive RFP process, but still with as much transparency and competition as is appropriate. And so after the RFP was canceled, then we moved forward with a request for information from vendors known to the district.
Thank you. So after we forwarded to all 3 vendors, including the 2 who had quoted, we forwarded 12 questions relative to the district's requirements in terms of meeting guidelines, federal, state, and local guidelines. Of course, once again, our main challenge or our main issue was to ensure, 1, that teachers were paid what they earned. Secondly, to make sure that teachers receive sick leave in accordance to state of Georgia laws. So once we put the information out, information was received by 2 of the 3 vendors. From the information that was received at that particular time, we selected to make the recommendation to Dr. Green to select Interlodge Incorporated for the 2015-2016 school year. Please be advised that the strong language that is placed in the contract requires that every penny that the teachers earn, the teachers will receive. Therefore, the only fee that is paid to the vendor is the $11,500 per teacher fee. And that is the fee that they utilize to cover benefits, because the district does not provide benefits for this contract. Therefore, as I stated, all salaries that are earned by the teacher will go directly to the teacher. In addition to that, please note that the $3 million cost of this contract is not additional. What happens is if a school qualifies for 33 teachers, and we have budgeted 33 teachers at that school, the international teacher will serve as one of those teachers. So the amount of this contract is not above and beyond the current budget. These allotments are actually in the budget already. So it's not an additional cost. It's just simply we pull it out based upon an average daily cost for the individuals. Members of the board, what I provided for you in your folder is a quick packet of recommendations from principals that we have received relative to requesting that this program return. I have about 9 or 10, and it's a stapled packet of principals. Additionally, I would like to provide you with a few current changes that we certainly made sure that the contract had, and that is the last two. Will teachers receive paid sick leave? In the past, the former contract, no, it was not a part of the DCSD contract, therefore it was difficult to regulate. We ensured that the new contract has a part of the DCSD contract. Teachers will earn up to 12.5 sick days per year. That is consistent with what DeKalb teachers earn. The second requirement that we placed in the contract was, will teachers receive all wages earned? We put that in the contract. In past practices, we were not able to police that, but in the current contract that is being proposed, contract requires that all wages earned be passed along to the teacher. So for that reason, it is requested that the Board of Education approve the teacher services agreement with Interlodge Incorporated for up to 45 teachers for the 2015-2016 school year in a total amount not to exceed $3,050,000. Once again, this is a staffing resource. Please note that not one principal will be forced to take a teacher. This is just simply a resource. They can interview teachers from this pool of applicants. Should they desire not to select one, we will continue on with our recruitment efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Question, Mrs. Turner?
Dr. Ward-Smith, will the hiring of these teachers impact the 155.5?
Yes, ma'am. These teachers will only be hired in the areas of math, science, and special ed, and it is widely documented throughout the nation the shortages we have in these particular areas. So yes, ma'am, this particular contract is designed to be a resource for finding special education, math and science teachers.
Thank you.
Mr. Orson?
Dr. Wordsmith, thank you for the presentation. And as you know, I've had some questions about these relationships, and I first want to commend you all for really addressing some of these concerns that we've both identified as a system and that were also reported in the media. I think every effort we make to ensure that we are treating these instructors fairly, not just in accordance with the minimum of the law, but treating them as real members of our staff, I think is important in the messaging we send. And on that note, so I have a couple questions and comments to sort of mixed in here, because and I know in the conversations we've had, our ultimate goal is to reduce our reliance on these kind of agencies. And I know that the superintendent has talked about sort of a longer-term plan to address how we do recruitment and to look for ideas that are in addition to what you're already doing. And I think even we have discussed, even prior to your tenure, the idea of sponsoring students in certain critical needs areas, almost our own Teach for America, something, you know, multiple programs where we keep the teachers. Right. We could DeKalb, Teach for DeKalb. But that we need to really, and we're not alone in our struggles in trying to find qualified personnel, particularly in high critical need, low supply areas. But in this context, I do have, I think, a couple questions, or comments. One of which is, I think there is still a value to having available teachers who come from other places to bring other experiences, in addition to meeting our critical needs. And that as we look at this issue, we should figure out what weight we put on that value. I think, you know, internationalizing our staff, creating kind of visiting teaching opportunities is a value to any learning institution. I mean, universities do that on a routine basis. Right, exchanges. So I think as we have an opportunity to sort of unpeel this and look at it, we should see what some higher educational objectives might be served by factoring whether we're using these agencies or preferably creating our own opportunities. The second question I have on the financial arrangement of the $11,500, which I know you reference, is to pay benefits, and I presume also some profit, because they're not doing it simply because they like us. But I would, and not for today, but I'd like to learn a little bit more about how that 11,500 really breaks down as it pertains to benefits to these employees as opposed to profit to the enterprise, and that we consider, at least on a going forward basis, whether there is a way that we could provide the benefits and pay for them and sort of unpack that number so that we have a clearer picture of what we're paying to these agencies. Because I think I appreciate, but I don't know if the benefits they're getting are equivalent to what we provide our employees. There's a lot of questions out there that I think may be perfectly fine, but in the absence of clarity on it, we leave questions, and we leave a default that these companies are making $11,500 per employee, which does relate to a third question, which is, I assume that 11,500 is static, so even if we got a teacher only for one semester coming in the second half, so there is variable? Okay, so then that's another part. Okay, so that would be another part, again,
Right.
that goes along, because my takeaway is
Yes, sir, it's a proration.
Okay.
And please note that our current benefits that, and I received an estimate from Dr. Bell, to provide a first-year teacher with benefits, so let's just say a fifth-year teacher with a master's degree, to provide that teacher benefits, which includes our medical, TRS, our alt plan, to provide a $50,000 teacher benefits would be roughly about $16,000.
right, about 30%.
Yeah.
Right.
About
So-
16, 17,000. So this particular contract, the 11.5 that the vendor has, takes care of the retirement system, takes care of whatever they offer the employee. But yes, sir, I'll certainly ask for a breakdown.
But this goes back to the sort of preliminary question. I want to make sure we're also treating fairly. They
Yes,
may
sir.
be getting benefits at a lower rate and also a lower rate of benefits. And so I just think that's a philosophical question that we need to decide.
Yes, sir.
That pricing go up or down, I think ultimately we also want to be fair to these employees. The last part, which I know is, again, in some of these contracts, there's usually some language about not hiring them away. Are we restricted? If we found a teacher we really liked out of this program and we wanted to make a permanent employee, sometimes these agencies will try to prevent that. Right. Or because I think, as you've shown us in the letters, and the fact that 7 of them have been teachers of the year, there may be some highly qualified, really,
Certainly.
let's assume they're all qualified, but really highly qualified, highly effective teachers that we might want to include in our system. And I just want to make sure we are protected in a reasonable way if we found that there's an employee who, I think they're probably on J1 visas or limited to 3-year
Correct.
anyway before they have to leave, and then they can come back for a second
Right.
rotation. So again, this is all about strengthening what we have ultimately in DeKalb County, and both in the short term but also in the long term.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jester?
Thank you. Mr. Walker. Yes, sir. You had mentioned that the RFP was canceled, and you went through another process that DJE allows for.
That's correct.
Is that correct? I wasn't aware that we could have go into service agreements, enter into contracts without them being bid.
Yes, the provisions of DJE specifically are Part 3, subsection B4, and that contemplates what is described as a non-competitive selection process for professional services. And it's a little tenuous within the policy because it refers back to a different section, but when the professional services are defined within the policy, it actually lists recruiting agencies as an example of a professional service by which this type of procurement process might be used.
Gotcha.
So although the district did make the decision to move forward with an RFP in that initial iteration, the formalized RFP wasn't necessarily required. We could have done this other process, and I think the restrictions there speak to being as open and transparent and competitive as possible, which is, as Dr. Ward Smith elaborated, the 3 potential vendors we were aware of were all given equal access and opportunity to participate in this non-RFP process.
Sure, and obviously we want to be as competitive as possible. If you get the chance, can you email that to the board so that we can all be aware of that? And DJE, that'd be great. Sure. And the RFP itself, when it was originally sent out, limited the request to international teachers. Why not teachers from the United States?
Per our conversation on Friday, Mr. Jester, we did have the opportunity to engage with a few other vendors, not a part of this process. As Carla stated, we sent it to over 50 vendors as well as put it on a national exchange. Our challenges were one vendor charged up to 40% of the teacher's salary plus a $5,000 placement fee. Other vendors charged $10,000. That was Teach for America. That was the first year and the second year. And generally what we found is that those particular individuals, it's a 2-year term. So the retention was certainly something that we considered. But ultimately, cost was certainly a factor. And as I stated, we had one vendor in particular that charged 40% plus a $5,000 placement fee. So it was with that decision that we elected to move forward with the recommendation to Dr. Green for this contract.
So if we had opened that up to the original RFP to U.S. vendors as well as international vendors, that makes at least 5 or 6 different responses we would have gotten.
As I stated, the information was forwarded to the vendors based upon the RFP process. Relative to that RFP, we received the responses and the responses that were received.
No, but the RFP was for international
Yes, sir.
vendors, and you said that the local vendors.
Yes, sir.
So the local vendors didn't qualify for this RFP.
No, sir.
Right. So if we had opened it up to everyone, then we would have gotten a lot more. Granted, they would have been extremely expensive.
Extremely expensive. And as stated, there's nothing that prohibits us from doing that in the future, but for this particular contract, we did consider the International Teachers Program.
So I think the whole idea of the bidding process is, first, we want to have an open bidding process. We want to have as many bidders come in and bid. Even if it's exorbitantly expensive, we want to see that bid, and we want to rank them according to best fit. And by limiting to international vendors, we cut out all those vendors locally we could have had. So there's quite a few local vendors that we could be using as we speak. They're just a little more expensive.
They're very expensive, but once again, this does not prohibit us, should Dr. Green and the board decide for us to move forward with a particular placement agency. As I stated, as we continue to strengthen our salary structure, it is my intent to reduce our total reliance on this particular contract. But where we find ourselves with 4 days for children to report is to have qualified staff in school, regardless of the vendor that they come from. So once again, for that reason, that is why we're recommending this contract.
Right.
Let me can I just add it here too, and we've had this conversation, Mr. Jester. So
yes, sir.
I don't mind sharing it with you again. But what weighed heavily on my decision to accept the recommendation and move forward with the recommendation and present to the board is the historical relationship that we have had with Interlodge. And so a 10-year history in which they have given us good service and been of good service to our children weighs heavily in that vein. And so combined with the cost factor and the good with their history of delivering good outcomes for our children was a weighty factor for me.
Sure, absolutely. And if we had opened this up to everybody, then we would have had 5, 10, or how many bids. Most of them would have been extremely expensive, and Interlodge would have blown them out of the water because of our previous relationship and their excellent service. But we didn't have a completed bid process. We didn't give them the chance, and we don't see the bids. We don't see what these prices were. We don't see any of that. All we see is Interlodge won this on a no bid, and that's moving forward. I would like to see more things bid out when we can.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Johnson, I'd like to.
Mrs. Turner?
Okay. I'd just like to say, this is, whether we had more bidders come to the table or not, it's pure speculation that they would have been cheaper or anything. We really don't know. But the charge, I feel, the charge for HR, the charge for our superintendent is to lessen these vacancies. And if you found a successful relationship with a vendor, and we can read documentation that verifies their actual performance in the school, in other words, to me, I'm simple, 1 + 1 = 2. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it sounds like, I understand we can expand the pool, and Mr. Jester, to your point, if we are charged with the responsibility of being good stewards over the finances that have been committed to us as a board, then I say, why open it up and know already, based on history, that the bids are expensive and that there's no competition? So I'm trying to see where we're going with it, because we keep beating a dead horse. Our bottom line for this school year coming into just a week away is to get some teachers in these classrooms, right? And so if we found a way to do so, while it may not have met your requirements or what you think how it should have happened, it's been a weighty responsibility for HR. It's a weighty responsibility to get these positions filled. And so I applaud the efforts that have gone. We have legal counsel. We're taking their counsel on what we should do. We have those that have been involved in this process that have done their due diligence. While they may not have done what you thought, I thought it was a diligent effort to get these teachers in place. And so I think we need to move on.
Thank you, Mrs. Turner. Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Ward-Smith, thank you for all you do. And very informative packet regarding Intelage. It denoted that they provided us 29 employee teachers last year. Were there additional firms that we employed last year? And how many teachers did the additional firm supply?
Yes, sir. Global Teachers was the other firm that we utilized, and they had 29, I believe, as well. Yes, sir. So right there, we're already reducing from a total of 60 down to 45 and stepping it back.
No further questions. Dr. Irwin, I'm sorry.
I just want to get some clarity on Mr. Justice's request. Do you just want to see the documentation of the evaluation process, and along with a bigger pool of candidates?
My biggest request is that we open it up to a bigger pool of candidates, and even if we know more than likely Intelage is going to win it, I want to see why.
Well, that's the evaluation document then, because it would be on
But
scale.
we don't have. But we didn't open that RFP up. We only.
That's the question I'm trying to ask. What are you looking for? That evaluation document that will be used in the future?
Oh, gotcha. In the future, I think we should open it up and have competitive bids on every service agreement, even if we're pretty sure that we know who's going to win it.
No further questions. Is there any opposition to placing this item on the consent agenda for this evening? One. So therefore, it will not be on the consent agenda. It will be, Margaret, make sure that we take this as an action item this evening.